train rolling, freight train rolling, freight train rolling, rolling on down the line.
Hello and welcome to Counterpunch Radio. My name's Eric Draitser. Thanks so much for tuning in, for coming back. First-time listeners, welcome. Thanks for finding the show. Hope you will enjoy not only this episode, but hopefully you'll go back in the archives, listen to the previous episodes. And of course, returning listeners, always grateful for your continued support. Thanks for everybody who has reached out. I think I've responded to some, maybe some I haven't responded to yet. I will make sure to do that. I'm always happy to get correspondence, even when it's negative. So thank you so much for that and for your continued support, not only for this show, but especially for Counterpunch generally. I always make this plug at the beginning of the show, and I do that because I think that Counterpunch is critical. I really appreciate that it is a space on the left in the alternative media that can give voice and give a platform to perspectives that are either ignored by the mainstream corporate media or that are distorted by that same media. And I think the Counterpunch serves a valuable function in that regard. So if you agree, then please consider getting a subscription to the magazine. It's a great way to support the show and also to support Counterpunch as a project, and also getting something out of it. I really appreciate a print magazine, in particular, given the times that we're living in and the death of print media. So please do consider that. You can also make a donation through the PayPal button on the website. You can call the number. You can find other ways to do it. So please consider it. All right, and also just another plug for my other work. You can find my other podcasts, audio commentaries, essays, and a whole lot more, art criticism, poetry. That's all on my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Eric Draitser. If you're interested in that sort of stuff, please do check that out. So thanks for that. With all of that shameless promotion out of the way, let me turn to my guest today. I'm very happy to welcome Ronnie Barkan onto the show. Ronnie is in my opinion, an incredibly important Israeli activist to be following. He is a co-founder of Boycott from Within, which is a group of Israeli citizens and residents supporting the Palestinian call for BDS. That's Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions from Israel. He is a very important voice. You can follow that movement and his work at boycottisrael.info, as well as on Twitter at Ronnie_Barkan and on Facebook. So without further ado, Ronnie Barkan, welcome to Counterpunch Radio.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. And before we get into all of the really heavy and weighty subjects around Palestine and around the struggle of the Palestinian people and the struggle against Israeli colonialism, apartheid, etc., I want to give a sense of you and your background and how you came to do this work. So what brought you to being this dissident that you are and this activist against Israeli apartheid and Israeli oppression of the Palestinians? Tell us a little bit about your life and your experiences that brought you to this point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I grew up like most Israelis, going through the indoctrination system, going through like where we're being taught to be soldiers from kindergarten, literally from kindergarten. And there is a straight path leading to the army. And for most Israelis, to be an Israeli equals being a soldier. So later on, when I decided to refuse serving in the army, and I approached other people saying, that I'm a conscientious objector, then usually one of the first responses that I would hear when I say that I refuse to serve in the army is, so why do you live here? Because if you don't serve in the army, you basically, according to most Israeli perspectives, you don't really earn the right to live there. So there's this thing that is tied in very strongly from very early on. And then later on, I grew up in a relatively trouble-free upper middle class area of Israel, or what we call Palestine 48. And I would say that I didn't have any political upbringing. Quite the contrary. I had a totally apolitical upbringing. Luckily, I did have quite a bit of leeway in order to choose my path and my convictions, but there was no one around actually to guide me in the political perspective. So I had to do that for myself. Now, I mentioned that I went through the whole indoctrination system, and it's quite easy to grow up as an Israeli and to blindly believe that the Israeli Defense Forces have anything to do with defense, to believe in this brainwashing that exists throughout childhood, a soft type of brainwashing, but very effective, that, Israel extends its hand for peace and it is surrounded by enemies and all of those, whereas the reality is quite on the contrary. Especially for those who grow in what we regard as liberal Zionist households, those who would, otherwise consider themselves as liberal and progressive, even humanists, and at the same time clinging on very strongly to their Zionist perspective. And it's quite amazing that people can carry on living their lives like that without actually realizing how brainwashed and how that totally doesn't have any meaning whatsoever. I mean, and so basically this long introduction comes to say that the way I see the situation in Israel-Palestine is that when I talk to you, someone from abroad, I could stick to the facts and explain the whole situation about settler colonialism and apartheid and all the horrible crimes that Israel is responsible for at least the past 7 decades. But when I discuss with Israelis, that's a whole different issue because it's never about the facts. There is a whole psychological issue that has to be dealt with. And especially so when we're talking about the so-called liberals. Because they, in order to be liberal and Zionist at the same time, they not only lie to the rest of the world, they have to lie to themselves every moment of every day in order to maintain this very conflicting, illogical type of view about life. So I think that for any Israeli dissident, as you mentioned before, and I proudly refer to myself as such, anyone who basically overcame Zionism, sobered up from Zionism, it is really a sobering up process that needs to take place. Now, for some people, it is more difficult. For others, like me, who I was quite lucky in that it was quite an easy process, but it does mean a psychological process and realization. Like there needs to be some eureka moment, some understanding that actually nothing that I was told about where I was living is true. All of it is wrong. All of it is convoluted. And then, once it is possible to break away from whatever brainwashing exists, then, the rest of the story, I think, is quite easy to understand. But first, there is this mental barrier that has to be overcome.
I think that's a great way of putting it, and I think that's a valuable insight, especially for people who either live outside of Israel or even people who are not Jews, because I think that, as you were alluding to, there is an element of brainwashing that exists even among the Jewish diaspora, and that's actually one of the processes, in my opinion, that the Israeli government, the Israeli state, is concerned about, this growing trend, particularly among younger American Jews, especially, to reject a lot of these preconceived notions about Israel, about Israeli, or the Jewish claims to Palestine and the dehumanization of Palestinians and so forth. So that even some of the entrenched liberal Zionism may seem to be changing as conditions around us change.
Yes, absolutely. And that is a very reassuring sign, actually. The foothold of liberal Zionism, which is totally Orwellian discourse that claims, as I said, that there is such form of liberal Zionism, liberal supremacy, that you could at the same time believe in basically racial or ethnic purity and exclusive, and to believe in some people being better than others based on their DNA or ethnicity and so on, to vehemently oppose basic democratic values like equality and so on, and at the same time also consider yourself liberal, and that obviously doesn't go well together. So what is happening these days is the erosion of this narrative that has been leading the discourse in the media, that has been leading the discourse in politics and so on for the past 7 decades around Israel-Palestine, and that is a very reassuring sign, and one one of these signs is clearly the shift that we see in the U.S. with American Jews, those who grew up in usually Zionist households, who learned to basically blindly support the state of Israel. And at some point, they have, again, came to a realization that actually Israel today, at least, maybe they have a different perception of what Israel used to be in the past, based on that propaganda that I mentioned before. But they realized that at least the Israel of today doesn't live up to, doesn't go well with their liberal values about other things. And we see in the polls a very clear distancing of American Jewry from Israel, or at least from blindly supporting the state of Israel. Luckily, I'm very happy to say that there is also a very impressive growth in those who have totally overcame Zionism and now realize that, the very elementary thing that we should do as human beings, let alone those that the state of Israel claims to speak on our behalf, is to support Palestinian rights, and doing so by strictly supporting or wholeheartedly supporting the Palestinian-led BDS campaign, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions campaign against Israel. And I'm referring especially in the U.S. context to a group called Jewish Voice for Peace, which grew tremendously over the past years. And you can tell that it has way more presence online, not necessarily as much funding as APAC and J Street and so on, but it has way more online presence. And if you look at its membership, if you look at its page likes and so on, whichever criteria you choose to look at, you will see that they are being much more vocal. And this is a very reassuring sign that this is also happening even in the U.S. Those who grew up to think one way are over the past decade or so have transitioned, have had a change of heart about what they were told about Israel, and are realizing for themselves what this is really all about.
Indeed, I think that's a very important point as well, and I was hoping that we would get in depth on this subject a little bit later, but now that it's open, let's discuss it further, because I think that as you were saying, on the one hand, there is seemingly, at least among American Jews, particularly of the millennial generation, younger Jews, say under 40, there is this at least growing consciousness, if not fully anti-Zionist consciousness, because I think that's going too far, but certainly a growing awareness of what Israel has come to represent, what Israeli policies are today, and so forth. And I wonder, could you, since you mentioned liberal Zionism and liberal delusions about Zionism, the counterpoint to that I'd like you to talk about is the Zionist embrace, particularly among the far right and of the right-wing government in Israel, of the far right in the West, of white supremacists, white nationalists, and so forth, whether it's of the standard Trumpian variety or even of the more extreme variety that you see in Europe and elsewhere. Part of that seems to be what's driving some of the revulsion against Israel from liberal perspective, but also some of the growing support of Israel from some of these far-right elements. So can you talk about the counterpoint of Israel's embrace of the far right?
Yes. First of all, we have to remember that Zionism, and now there's no one definition for Zionism. I could give my own definition if that helps. But what is clear is that Zionism was a reactionary response to real anti-Semitism that existed in Europe at the time. But unfortunately, the Zionists have fully adopted the anti-Semitic discourse, only with different conclusions, with different end goal. So from early on, there were ties. The Zionists realized that actually their allies also include those who were clearly anti-Semitic, including, for example, Lord Balfour. I mean, who was a clear anti-Semite and who we just, celebrated or marked 120 years to the Balfour Declaration. So, 100 years to the Balfour Declaration, 120 years to the First Zionist Congress. So When we discuss those who support the Zionist project back in the day, but also today, we have to remember that there are at the very least those different interests that merge. I mean, the shared interests between the Zionists and those who are clearly racist and anti-Semitic. You can look at it in different ways to resolve what is regarded as quote unquote the Jewish problem, or to simply say that we want to have a proxy state that basically does the bid for us in the Middle East. There are different arguments for why the same type of thinking that the Zionists tried to respond to was actually perpetuated later on. Now, we have to remember that at the same time, there were Jews who were clearly opposed to Zionism. There are those who are ultra-Orthodox. And at the time, until roughly World War II, the ultra-Orthodox were not supportive of Zionism. Zionism was a secular movement that actually treated the ultra-Orthodox Jews of Europe with the greatest contempt, in the most racist way. The same anti-Semitic tropes, saying that these ultra-Orthodox are carrying disease and that they are primitive and backwards and so on. And Zionism basically was a movement of secular Jews who wanted to establish a national with some nationalistic agenda, but it wasn't only about that. As I said, because it was a response to anti-Semitism, saying that somehow Jews are different, the Zionists adopted that view that they are different, and therefore they cannot be part of the rest of society. So because we are different, because people don't like us, we need to have our different special place for us and only for us. And this type of thinking that somehow there is a need for an exclusivist place, an exclusive place that is for us and only for us, is started very early on in Zionism and is clearly the main element in the establishment of the Zionist state, the state of Israel. It is not only a settler colonial project. It's not only about coming and taking over the land, usurping the land, and using and abusing the human resources, and so on. But also inherent to the Zionist thinking, certainly in the establishment of the State of Israel, is the notion that this place is ours and only ours. And anyone who doesn't belong to our select ethnic group doesn't belong here at all. So from the very first moment, this was the notion of the establishment of the State of Israel. And I would argue that what happened is that the greatest Palestinian tragedy is not that in 1947 the UN decided to partition the land into two parts in a very unequal way, in a very unfair way, giving more than half of the land to less than half of the population. The Jews living there at the time only had about less than 10% of the land and so on. And they were far less than half of the population. Anyway, that was a very unfair decision, the partition plan by the UN. But that in itself is not what can be regarded as the Palestinian tragedy, because that was also, the partition plan per se was never implemented. What was implemented is something very different, which is basically that those who founded that state, the Zionist state, they wanted to establish what they call a Jewish and democratic state. Now, that's not a logical term. Either you have a democracy or you don't have a democracy. Either you have equality or you don't have equality. But what it meant for them then, and what it means to them to this day, is that if we are the majority, if we have our kind of population, then we can claim that we are a democracy. But first and foremost, we need to have our kind of people. And the very first thing that needed to happen in order to establish this so-called Jewish and democratic state is to evict the land of its indigenous people, to create a Jewish majority by force. The very next thing that they did is to establish a whole legal system that will make sure that those who have been expelled will never be allowed to come back, and those who remain, because not everyone was expelled, will be denied equal standing, equal rights. And this is how the State of Israel was founded. Now, since then, until quite recently, this so-called Jewish democratic discourse held quite well. I mean, it was quite successful in convincing the world that there is something legitimate in what I just mentioned a moment ago, that it is okay to live there at the expense of the others for our cherished supremacist, state or ethnic, ethnic state. Now, over the past couple of decades, there is a shift, as you alluded to the right. I mean, there is a shift to what I would regard as the more honest of the Zionists, which say, yes, this is ours and only ours, and we are not so concerned about that liberal discourse. I mean, between the Jewish and democratic parts, we want the Jewish part. We don't care so much about the democratic. So they are far less concerned about playing the democratic game or doing this charade. And the more that the right wing is in power, and especially the acting administration, the more we see how Israel exposes itself or exposes its true face, that no, they are not really concerned about democratic values at all. Actually, they were never concerned about democratic values, but they did try to come across as ones. They're not even trying. Now, especially with the new law that was just legislated, they are saying very clearly, no, we are first and foremost an exclusivist idea. This project is for one select group of people. This is the most important thing for us. If there are other people, if we didn't manage to expel them, maybe we will let them stay under our conditions as subjugated people. If they abide by our rules, we will be, we will be nice enough to not expel them, but under our terms. And this is what we are seeing. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you alluded to it, so I think it's probably appropriate for us to discuss it in detail. This the recent law that was passed, the so-called Nationality Law. Before we go to the break, let's break down what that is. I mean, there's so many different aspects to it, and many ramifications and repercussions. But I want to get a clear understanding from you and an analysis from you of this law. What does it actually do? What does it actually legislate and institutionalize? And to what extent is this different from the kind of institutional discrimination that we've seen in Israel for decades leading up to this point? What's changed?
So the Jewish nation-state law is what is regarded as a basic law, which is akin to a constitution. Israel doesn't have a constitution on purpose. It cannot have a constitution. And I will explain why in a moment. But a basic law needs a vast majority to amend it, to change that. And that basic law says that there's different chapters there, but basically part of it is about reducing the status of Arabic as a formal language, to changing its status to a language with a special status, but not an official state language. There's other things about the ability to establish Jewish only settlements within Israel proper. So that is obviously quite a racist article there in the law. But I would argue that other than that, the law doesn't change much. It doesn't. There is nothing really so significant about the law, other than one thing, other than one element, which says that only the Jewish people have national rights in that land. And in other words, what it says is that, and it elaborates, it says all citizens will have citizenship rights, but there is only one group that will have national rights, and those are the Jewish people. Now, that is what the law is really about. It doesn't change anything about the situation of Israel in its current format. What it changes is what can possibly happen in the future. If up until now, Israel was claiming to be a Jewish and democratic state, therefore, the leading force, basically, in running the state is maintaining this cherished Jewish majority at any cost. And we know, for example, that the Secret Security Service, the Shin Bet, stated in court in the past that they are monitoring anyone who works, who opposes the Jewish character of the state, even if they do it legally. So basically, anyone promoting equality, anyone promoting democracy, is regarded by the security service of the state as some sort of a security threat, which is worthy to monitor some people. So we know that this was happening all along, but Israel was still playing this democratic game. What the law says now is, well, actually, about certain rights, we don't care about the view of the majority. What we care about is only the view of the Jewish people. And we have to understand how the Israel legal system is built, actually. It was built from the ground up as an apartheid state. From the very beginning, there was a distinction between what is regarded as citizenship rights and national rights. In other languages, people don't really understand the difference because we use it interchangeably, citizenship and nationality. But in the Israeli legal system, there is a huge difference. I am an Israeli citizen, but I do not have an Israeli nationality because there is no such thing. My nationality, according to the state of Israel, is Jewish. My neighbor living in Israel, who is also an Israeli citizen and who is not among the privileged group, they would have another nationality. They could have an Arab nationality, for example, or Druze or Circassian, or basically any of the over 130 different nationalities that the Ministry of Interior recognizes, but there is one nationality that it clearly does not recognize. It vehemently refuses to recognize that, and that is an Israeli nationality. And this was also taken to the Supreme Court a couple of times, and the court said very clearly that acknowledging an Israeli nationality in Israel would undermine the very character of the state of Israel. And that is a very true statement coming from that horrible court, which is, I would argue, the main vehicle of apartheid, because acknowledging the same nationality for all the citizens of the state would, at least on paper, establish some basis for equality among the different the citizens of that state. But that is not at all what the state of Israel is about. This is why we have the differentiation between citizenship and Israeli citizenship, which all the citizens have. But then, in order to differentiate between the subjugated second-class citizens and those who are among the privileged group, we also have another category, which is nationality. And there are many laws. There are 3 laws that are explicitly racist that say if one is of Jewish nationality, then they get certain rights. And to this day, we have over 50 or possibly almost over 70 laws that depend on these former laws. And they are basically discriminatory laws between the citizens of that state. And they apply to many aspects of life. So basically, there is no, as you know, there is no one-state solution, but there is a one-state condition in Israel-Palestine, where Israel controls, or the Zionist state, the regime controls the entire land, but in a very unequal way. And or rather than saying that there is a one-state condition, I would say that there is a multiverse of states on that land, depending on your geography and nationality and ethnicity and on and on. So on the same spot of land, different laws apply to different people mostly based on their ethnicity. This is how the state of Israel, runs what its whole operation. And what the new law says is basically we have to change that, or in the future we will not care so much about the view of the majority. We enshrine that in law that only that select group will have the national rights, regardless of the number in society. So what it says is actually it doesn't change anything about the current practice, but it does change things for the future, because if Israel chooses tomorrow to annex Area C or to annex the whole of the West Bank, they could in theory do that and possibly even give citizenship to those people that are currently under military occupation, and still that would not undermine the so-called demographic threat, because there wouldn't be any more a need to discuss this demographic discourse anymore. It is enshrined in the law that only the select group have the important rights, the national rights.
That's such an important analysis, and the distinction that you made between citizenship and nationality, I think that is a point that needs to be made repeatedly and oftentimes, I think, overlooked or not known, especially by people observing the situation from outside. Well, we're well overdue for a break, so let's take a quick break, and on the other side of the break, we have a lot more to discuss: the recent developments with Ahed Tamimi, what that means, and what that means for the internal Israeli discourse is a very interesting question to discuss. The current state of the BDS movement and attempts to stifle and suppress it, and a whole lot more. I'll continue the conversation with Ronnie Barkan. Here you're listening to Counterpunch Radio. We'll be right back. And we're back here on Counterpunch Radio. So much more to discuss with Ronnie Barkan. His excellent insights and analysis. I highly recommend you follow Ronnie on Twitter at Ronnie_Barkan. That's RONNIE_BARKAN, Ronnie_Barkan. And you could also follow him on Facebook, and make sure to visit the website regularly. That's boycottisrael.info. So, Ronnie, we were discussing a lot of different issues, pretty in depth, I have to say, in the first half of the conversation, but I do want to shift gears to some contemporary issues that are dominating headlines around Palestine and the struggle for Palestinian rights and Palestinian liberation. And I think right now the dominant story has to do with this young woman, Ahed Tamimi, and her recent release from Israeli custody. So if if you could, just in a very, brief summary, help us to understand why this issue is important, or what happened, and why Ahed Tamimi is such a focal point of attention right now. But the real meat of the discussion that I want to get into from you is, what impact does Ahed Tamimi and the narrative around her have on internal Israeli discourse? What are the people in the media saying? What's the right say? What do the liberal Zionists say? How has it impacted discussion in Israel?
So Ahed, she is from the village of Nabi Saleh, which is routinely, in the occupied West Bank. They demonstrate weekly against the settlements there and the annexation of their water well and other things, hardships living under occupation, and along with the solidarity coming from people from abroad and a handful of Israelis, conscientious Israelis, who join in these demonstrations. Obviously, there is also a large military presence because of that, those demonstrations, and therefore even more military oppression and repression. So Ahed, like most people of the village, have, unfortunately gotten used to this violence coming from the Israeli army, but they also regularly, for example, occupy their house or the area near their house, and that is what happened on that day when soldiers came and basically stood at the porch, like in front of the house, and she was trying to drive them away from there. What happened earlier is that they also shot her cousin in the face. He was badly injured, luckily he survived and is doing relatively well. But all of these things, living in this unbearable situation where, occupation doesn't really convey the entire story here. And occupation is not only the presence of the soldiers, it is in every moment of these people's lives living under occupation. In that situation, she did what she thought was best, and I think that many people appreciated, which is to strike the soldier, to slap him, trying to drive him away from her home, which he invaded. And doing that also basically stresses the importance of symbolism in our struggle. Because obviously, where the power balance was not in Ahed's favor, this was a fully armed and protected soldier with his, other Israeli terrorists around him, and so on. And Ahed is a little girl who stood up to that guy and put herself at risk, of course. But since this was captured on video and distributed and so on, this symbolic act actually changes the whole power balance. And this is what basically we are doing in general in activism, and especially in the Israeli-Palestinian case, because obviously Israel has as much power as it wants. I mean, military power, it's the fourth largest nuclear superpower in the world. It has endless supply of weapons. It has a strong economy, and again a whole lot of support from the US, from US taxpayers. Also, the EU is funding the occupation in its own way, or maintaining the occupation. And at the same time that Israel has all of that, and it has a strong political lobby and so on, we have everything else on our side. We have truth and justice and equality, and basically, we don't have to hide in the darkness. We can do things publicly, and this is our greatest strength, to expose Israeli crimes and to not fear doing that, even though there are consequences. And there were consequences for Ahed. She spent quite a few months in jail. Her and her mother. Her other family members are still in jail, in prison. I won't go into the whole incarceration in Israeli military prisons, which is a whole issue in itself, because I don't think we have enough time for that. But basically, this symbol, which basically Ahed became a symbol of the struggle, she became an icon, a Palestinian icon, is probably what Israel fears of the most. We know this, for example, from the WikiLeaks documents in the, what was it, the embassy cables, where Israel told the US administration that we don't do Gandhi very well. There is no problem for Israel to quash armed resistance. They have, as I said, they have way more soldiers and guns and what have you. But with regard to the non-violent resistance, or what I would call the popular resistance, not necessarily non-violent, but actually the resistance coming from the people, that is something that Israel has a very hard time to handle, because when people demand their rights and when they do it properly, even a great superpower in a way like Israel has very little that it can do other than, use more and more force. But brute force alone just doesn't cut it. It's not good enough. I mean, it's obviously the situation is horrible, and it may even get darker. It may even get worse in the next months or years. But at the same time, I am very optimistic, because everything about the discourse, everything about the standing of Israel in the world is changing. Israel is in a free fall. It is a criminal pariah state, and it is in a free fall. Its status is plummeting. In a UK poll from a couple of years ago, when British people had to choose the most and the least favorable countries in the world, Israel came third to last. And it is not only happening in the UK. There are very clear signs that whatever was quite successful for Israel for the past, let's say, 6 decades, does not work that very well over the recent decade or so. And I would correlate that quite a bit with the BDS campaign. The BDS campaign and some other things that happened have managed to shed light on the true nature of Israel, and also to galvanize that struggle, that basically that resistance of Palestinians who are scattered around the world, who are geographically separated, and also Israel was doing a very good job at divide and conquer. So there's also that, the political divide and conquer, and with the BDS campaign that basically consolidates these 3 fundamental rights of the Palestinians into one consolidated demand, it manages to turn the whole discourse on its head and to focus on the real issues at hand.
I definitely.
So I would use.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I definitely agree about BDS. I just want to hold off for a minute on talking about BDS, because I want to finish the point about Ahed Tamimi, and specifically the question of the discourse that her release has inspired within the Israeli state, both in terms of the political leadership, but I think in particular popular media and among the Israeli citizenry. I mean, how is the Tamimi episode being interpreted? How are they squaring the circle? How are they justifying and or criticizing both Israel and the course that the Israeli state chose? I'm very interested from an insider perspective how it's being discussed.
So as usual with Zionists, I can differentiate and say that there are actually only 2 viewpoints here, only 2 Zionist views. There are what I regard as the honest Zionists, the right-wing Zionists, which are, racist and proud of it, which are the ones that I mentioned before, the acting administration, the ones who say this is ours and only ours. And in their view, Ahed is a terrorist. She needs to be behind bars for life, or even worse. I mean, some actually, even ministers in the Israeli parliament have actually stated far worse things than only putting her behind bars. I will not reiterate that right now. But she's regarded as a terrorist, and basically that for basically for slapping a soldier in the face. We have to put that in perspective. A fully armed soldier, and basically they don't think that she has any rights whatsoever. And at the same time, we have the other types of Zionists, which are the so-called liberal Zionists, and with them, it is a little different because obviously, coming from this more liberal perspective, what do you do about that? In that case, with some liberal Zionists, actually, they could not, basically justify what can be seen in the video. They could not justify the incarceration of Ahed and so on. But at the same time, their discourse would only be limited to that horrible military occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So the way to deal with that is to compartmentalize it, to say, yes, she shouldn't have slapped the soldier, but she is after all under occupation and so on. But that is because the situation there is so bad in the West Bank. At the same time, they would go above and beyond to justify whatever is happening inside Israel proper, in whatever is happening in what they regard as the Israeli democracy.
So can I just ask can I just ask a clarifying question, Robbie?
Yes.
Ronnie, because I'm a little confused. Okay, so are you suggesting then that in the liberal Zionist viewpoint, what they're able to do is, when you say compartmentalize, in my mind, what you're really saying is that they externalize the oppression. In other words, the oppression is happening in these two very discrete and specific places, the West Bank and in Gaza, and everything and what the Israelis are doing is bad, and Israel needs to stop doing that. But they're unable to then broaden the understanding of the oppression to actually the broader Zionist project, the broader question of Israel and Palestine as a whole. I mean, is that what you're essentially arguing?
Yes, correct. Now, we would need to spend a little time to explain, the type of thinking of liberal Zionism. But basically, that so-called liberal discourse that we read on the New York Times, every piece on Haaretz newspaper, for example, and so on. Basically, this is a discourse that is totally based on lies upon lies. It starts off with assuming that Israel and Palestine are two separate entities, rather than Israel being established literally on top of Palestine at the expense of the Palestinian people. Israel and Palestine are the very same spot of land. For liberal Zionists, there is Israel alongside Palestine. So there is the whatever is legitimate Israel that would be supposedly democratic and so on, and then there is Palestine, which is currently being occupied. And that is what needs to be resolved. But whatever is regarded as the Israel part, not the Palestine part, with that they have very little issues. So first of all, the notion of what is Israel and Palestine. Then, of course, where does the problem start, which goes back to the same issue? Is it about the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza? Is it the occupation of 67? Or is it how the Zionist state was founded in 1948 at the expense of Palestinians by means of ethnic cleansing and ethnic segregation and establishing an apartheid state back then in 48. Only 19 years later came a harsh military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. Other things are obviously the notion of Jewish and democratic that I mentioned before, that, it doesn't really stand to logic, but there is some effort to square the circle there. But those people, they honestly believe that they live in a democracy, even in a vibrant democracy, and that the issue is only with the occupation of 67. So this is what I meant by compartmentalizing, that whatever is happening there in the West Bank can be understood, while at the same time fully supporting the far greater, possibly Israeli crimes, fully supporting the Israeli army, because they all support the army. Maybe saying that not everything that the Israeli army is doing in the occupied territories is wonderful, but at the same time fully supporting the army, and so on. When there was the massacres in Gaza in 2014 and in 2008, 2009, over 95% of Israelis, when we say Israelis, we never count those who are not Israeli Jews. This is unless explicitly stated. When we say Israelis, we only count 80% of the population. So 95% or more of Israelis supported the massacre in both massacres, 2008 and 2014. Only 2 or 3% thought that Israel was using excessive force in Gaza at the time, while they were demolishing mosques and hospitals and so on, and razing to the ground entire neighborhoods. So this is the type of thinking that's common to both, among Israeli society. There is very little criticism of the role of the army in general. There is very little criticism or no criticism at all of the inherent supremacist character of the state, as mentioned before. There is very little criticism of the issue of not the West Bank and Gaza, but what about the refugees, those who are absent from the land, and they are the majority of Palestinians. So when they talk about, for example, a Jewish majority, and any demographic discourse is a deeply racist discourse, but this is the discourse that is carrying on, especially among those so-called liberals, discussing demographics all the time. How many of us versus how many of them? It's very important to discuss that when you want to maintain a Jewish majority. So when they, do this math game, they never count the refugees. At best, they will say, okay, there are 6 million Israeli Jews, and then there are 6 million non-Jews on that land, okay, which are, some of them, 20% of the population of Israel are non-Jews, and then the rest in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. So now they will say something like, okay, Israel is reaching an apartheid cliff, because now we are arriving at a 50-50 mark, 6 million of those, 6 million of those. They never count the other 6 million who are in the diaspora,
right?
The refugees in the diaspora,
because they don't want to acknowledge the apartheid state that's been in existence for many years now. The other
exactly.
The other thing that I just wanted to
maybe just one thing about that.
Oh, yeah.
In those liberals' views, they can maintain the notion that they live in a democracy as long as they are, 6,000,001 versus the other 6 million Palestinians on that land. Because in the Israeli context, the understanding of democracy is simply the rule of the majority. It doesn't matter what type of rule. There's absolutely nothing to do with, the question of democratic values like equality or the rights of minorities or multiculturalism, because Israel is established on the exact opposite values as those that I just mentioned. But as long as they manage to play the game, if they are a democracy, as long as they can somehow justify that it is, after all, the rule of the majority, then they're fine with that. So this is what I mean, that you can compartmentalize and kind of try to find a way to justify everything if you only look at a niche, if you only look at a segment rather than the whole picture.
Absolutely, that's very well said, and I just wanted to make the point to kind of further support what you're saying, that it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong or if you have a different interpretation, but this liberal Zionism that you're talking about, and some of the self-deception that really I think is inherent in liberal Zionism, I think this has real expression that we've seen recently. For instance, when you see the op-eds in some of the liberal Israeli papers like Haaretz and some of the others, you see I guess Haaretz is probably on its own, but that's a separate issue. In terms of the liberal opinion pieces about the nationality law, one of the seemingly underlying features or themes that ties them all together is a sense of embarrassment internationally, right? They don't want to be seen as so undemocratic. They don't want to be seen as fascistic. They don't want to be seen as part of an apartheid state. Rather than saying, you know what, this is what we are, and thank God the world is finally seeing it.
Exactly. This is why I'm saying that the right wing is much more honest, not decent, but honest about its racism. The liberal Zionists, every single one of them, is actually far more racist than the right wing, but also much more dishonest. Because the reason that they need to establish a Palestinian state is exactly in order to separate from Palestinians, because they are obsessed with the notion of demographics all the time. And just think that if this is the driving force for everything that people do, then it is a very, very racist view. For example, and I could give you many such examples. Peace Now, which is again supposedly a liberal, a progressive organization, they have a campaign to separate East Jerusalem neighborhoods from what is regarded Greater Jerusalem, from West, to separate East and West Jerusalem, because those people living in East Jerusalem, and that's another issue, and I will not go into that right now, they are not citizens of the state, they are residents. Because at the time when Israel annexed East Jerusalem, they wanted to annex the land they didn't have that basic law that we talked about a moment ago. So they wanted to annex the land without its population. So they invented a new legal category for them, and they made them, those residents of East Jerusalem, they called them residents, permanent residents. Anyway, these people who are permanent residents, they are not allowed to vote for the Israeli parliament, the apartheid parliament, but they can vote to the municipality. And those so-called liberal Zionist organizations are fearing that very soon in the next elections, the number game will change, and for the first time, Palestinians in East Jerusalem would, God, forbid, be able to elect an Arab mayor to the city of Jerusalem. So there are actually two campaigns taking place, one by Peace Now, another is by a group called Saving Jewish Jerusalem. And they are the most racist campaigns you can imagine. They say things like, soon, God forbid, the Mufti's grandson could be the mayor of Jerusalem. Or they regard the neighborhoods of East Jerusalem, at least one of their spokespeople, who is actually a former senior minister in the government, he regards the neighborhoods of East Jerusalem as a malignant tumor in the city. This is how the liberals speak about those Arab neighborhoods, Palestinian neighborhoods of Jerusalem, because they need to separate from them. They are dependent. For them, it is an existential issue. If they are not the majority, they cannot dictate anything. They must be, first and foremost, the majority, both in the municipal sense, in the issue of Jerusalem, because otherwise, the situation could lead to, in the future to a situation where there is an Arab mayor in the city, and certainly in the national level, so they must maintain this majority.
Yeah, it's a hashtag make Jerusalem Jewish again or something along those lines. Yes. Okay, so we are almost out of time here, but I want to touch on BDS because I think it's so critical. It's probably the most potent weapon that we have in terms of fighting against not only the policies of the Israeli state, but some of the very notions underlying the concept of Zionism and exclusivity and all of those things that you were talking about earlier. So tell us a little bit about the current state of BDS. I think that we can probably assume that most people listening to us have some background in what the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement is all about, and why the boycott of Israel internationally is so important and gaining so much momentum. But what is the current state now? We've seen repressive legislation circulated throughout the United States and individual states about BDS and how you're not allowed to talk about it on college campuses and all of these other things, trying to classify it as hate speech and so forth. I know BDS has run into a lot of opposition and obstacles, both institutional and otherwise, in places in Europe. I know you're based in Germany, at least currently. So what is the situation of BDS, both in terms of Israel and the boycott from within movement and organization, and especially internationally today?
Mm-hmm. So in July 2005, the Palestinian-led BDS campaign came into being and was issued. And since then, I would say that this has grown into a global movement that's spearheading the Palestinian struggle, but possibly even more than that. It became pretty much a global awareness movement. In analogy to the campaign against apartheid in South Africa at the time. And after, in the South African case, it took roughly 30 years of campaigning until eventually the BDS campaign became mainstream, and all countries of the world eventually were boycotting South Africa, other than two, Israel and the US, which were very good friends of South Africa. Israel was also arming South Africa to its teeth, and Nobel Prize laureate and arms dealer and so on, Shimon Peres, also tried to sell nuclear weapons to South Africa at the time. Anyhow, it became mainstream, the boycott of South Africa, and it became this awareness movement around the world. And we are seeing pretty much the same phenomena happening these days around the world with regard to the Palestinian-led BDS campaign. So first of all, I'm very happy that I have the opportunity to take part in that, both as a human being who cares about such values as equality and freedom and justice, and especially so because I happen to be born into a situation where I am the privileged person in that barbaric system that is all about giving privileges to me at the expense of the others. So so with privilege also comes responsibility. So I see. So I'm very happy that I can basically speak up as an Israeli dissident to oppose pretty much everything that Israel stands for. And like me, there are also a few others. It's not about the numbers. I mean, there's not so many conscientious Israelis who support BDS these days, but, these numbers are also growing, small. They're small, but, they're growing. And the more that Israel exposes its true nature, the more that people around the world, and also some Israelis, are compelled to rethink where they stand about it. And we see this tremendous growth in the BDS campaign, also with our successes around it. I mean, the list of successes is really too long to count. I will just mention that the Socialist International adopted, for example, the BDS campaign, or had some BDS resolution quite recently. And, this is basically, an international that is representing quite a few leftist parties around the world. So this is, when you have something like that is basically a decision by a global body or a representative body coming from a whole region and so on, endorsing BDS, and there are, as I mentioned, there are many other such examples that I could give. This is very, very reassuring, because we're transitioning, I think, from those successes that are very local in a way, to successes that are basically countrywide and beyond that, and this is very helpful. Another clear sign of the success of the BDS campaign is obviously looking at Israeli media. They don't want to report it. They are trying as much as they can not to report it. But they are talking about BDS all the time, obviously in a very negative way, totally misrepresenting it. There is actually no discussion whatsoever, no serious discussion about the BDS campaign. There's only defamation about it, but they talk about it all the time. They legislate laws against it, both inside Israel and abroad. As you know, in the US, there's many states that are trying to legislate against BDS, saying that this is some sort of hate speech or anti-Semitism or anything like that. And I see these as actually positive signs, because just like I mentioned before, Israel and whoever is affiliated or complicit in its crimes, all they have on their side is force and more force, and legislating such laws, such McCarthyistic laws. This is basically brute force. They are just trying to silence any voice of dissent, any voice of conscience. And what we have to do is just to speak up. We have to watch ourselves. We have to be smart about it. But what we have to do is simply to speak up. And they are, by legislating such outrageous laws, they are proving the point. Netanyahu is proving the point very well why Israel needs to be boycotted and sanctioned.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true.
And when we talk about here in Germany, I am actually, along with two other colleagues. One is another Israeli activist, another is a dear friend and activist from Gaza, and we will be taken to court soon for disrupting an Israeli representative of the Israeli parliament, who came to speak here in Humboldt University in Berlin. And there is a whole statement that we published later about why we did so, and it's called Speaking Up in Times of Apartheid. And we refer to the UN report that accuses Israel of the crime of apartheid, which, by the way, Israel practices apartheid throughout the territory under its control and beyond. It is not apartheid, which is a very serious crime under international law, is not only limited to the West Bank and Gaza, it's also throughout the state of Israel, and also, according to legal scholars Tilly and Falk, it also applies to those Palestinian refugees who are living under the direct consequence of Israeli apartheid. So basically, when we go and confront such a representative of that criminal apartheid parliament, and especially she came specifically to speak against BDS, and she's leading the anti-BDS lobby in the parliament, etc. And the fact that they are taking us to court, it's simply because they could not treat us like Ahed. They could not put us in prison, in a military prison with no trial or with like a sham trial. So they are doing whatever they can. But it is because we are basically virtually slapping the face of Israel by disrupting this representative from the parliament and saying, no, you're not a legitimate representative. You are representing a criminal apartheid state, a pariah state. We are not accepting the fact that the university here lends legitimacy to these crimes. If there is anything to be learned from Humboldt University and from the history of whatever has been happening here in Berlin not too long ago, is not to lend a hand to crimes against humanity, not to lend a hand to a state that is based on the notion of that some people are better than others, that there are superhumans and subhumans. This is exactly what we should be opposing. Now,
and that's exactly exactly what created the Holocaust, which supposedly lends legitimacy to the nation of Israel in the first place. It's an incredibly hypocritical mental gymnastics that these bastards have to go through in order to justify their unbelievably criminal and barbaric oppression.
Exactly. And I will give just one more example. You may have heard of another law that's in the making, which is a law in Israel that they are currently legislating that it will be illegal to film soldiers on duty. And those who film and the media that will report that footage may end up for 5 years in jail. And if this was done to harm state security, this could be up to 10 years in jail. Now, this law is a direct response to a small act of solidarity that we did a few months ago when the Gazans started the Great March of Return, basically demonstrating not only against the occupation of 67 as liberal Zionist media tries to report, but actually by the name it implies the March of Return. It is Gazans who are living in this open-air prison. Over 80% of them are refugees coming from the surrounding area, including Jaffa and Beersheba and so on. And they obviously not only want to end the military occupation and live a decent life, they want to go home, and they have every right to do so. Now, when they were demonstrating there in the Gaza ghetto, they were basically massacred. They were shot by snipers, by Israeli snipers. And on that day when we were demonstrating, it was the first Friday when they were there, we went to have some solidarity action on the other side of the fence of the ghetto. And we were just a handful of people with cameras, with phones. And I told one of the soldiers that actually I called him by names, and I said that he's like those who maintained the siege of the Warsaw Ghetto at the time. It is talking about symbolism. The Great March of Return started on Passover Eve, which is exactly when the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising started, on Passover Eve, many decades ago. So there are all these kind of, lines of interaction and similarities. So there was this video. There was another video where a fellow activist, she called the soldiers terrorists, and on that day they murdered 9 or 10 people who were demonstrating there in Gaza. So that video, when she was calling them terrorists, that went viral in Israeli media. There was a response from Netanyahu, the prime minister. There was a response from Lieberman, the minister of defense. And eventually they ended up legislating a law, and this is what is happening as we speak, that they are legislating this law saying that we are not allowed to film soldiers during action. And that is, again, a very good sign. Obviously, it means the consequences are horrible, that filming soldiers who do these horrible things could land people in prison for years. But this is a very good sign, because Israel is shedding whatever is left of this democratic facade. The mask is off by now, and they are showing their true face. And this is a very important issue. It wouldn't have happened if we didn't film the soldiers and call them terrorists. It wouldn't have happened if Ahed didn't slap the soldier in the face. It wouldn't have happened if I would not disrupt that criminal apartheid representative in Humboldt University in Berlin. There is a need to speak up and to expose Israel for what it is. And by doing that, it responds, and the only way that it knows how to respond only proves the point and only convinces the world of how just the struggle is, and how there is no more room for basically sitting on the fence. People have to decide which side they're on, whether they are with Zionism or with humanism, whether they are for equality, freedom, and justice, or against it. It's as simple as that.
I think that's very beautifully said, and I just want to take this opportunity to commend you on all of the work that you do on your activism. It's incredibly courageous, considering the forces that are arrayed against you. I have no doubt the kind of abuse and I'm sure worse than just abuse that you get from Israeli state, and probably from people that you've known in your life and so forth. I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage, but of course it takes even more courage to be a Palestinian facing those kind of odds and standing in resistance to that. And so I want to commend you. Of course, I commend all of the Palestinian resistance fighters and many others that you have worked with and that remain nameless here on this program. But it's very, very important. It has a special place in my heart, as well as somebody of Jewish background growing up in the United States, and who also had to unlearn a lot of Zionist propaganda, and who also had to kind of come to terms with what I was raised to believe versus what is the actual reality in this world. So, Ronnie, for raising consciousness and for taking risks and for all of the things that you do, I want to thank you for all of that work, and I want to thank you for coming on the show and helping us to understand the situation in Israel and in Palestine broadly.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And this is exactly the way to go with these shows, and with the listeners who will hopefully also take action after listening. I'm pretty optimistic that we actually can turn this situation around.
Thank you so much. I am as well. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in and for your continued support. Please do follow Ronnie and follow BDS, Boycott from Within, and BDS generally. Ronnie, follow him on Twitter at Ronnie_Barkan. Connect with him on Facebook, boycottisrael.info. Ronnie, thanks for coming on the show. Listeners, thank you as always, and I will chat with you all again real soon.